Pros are people who will look in the mirror and say, I know I have weaknesses. I'm going to seek out coaching and feedback and people that can help me get better. It's those subtle shifts in the mindset that, although Stu didn't say that stuff to me directly, that's what he was implying. Hey, you were great as an amateur, but you're a pro now. So it's a whole different ball game.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This week on Power Supply, we are going to be talking with Jimmy Farris, founder at Be a Pro, and this is going to be a bonus episode in between seasons. It's a story of a young man, wide receiver, really a standout at the college level, then moves to the NFL and really learned what it means to become a pro. And Gary, you know Jimmy, that's how we got him on the podcast. And obviously now he's doing some professional coaching, and he's just got some great stories coming up from his days and what he learned as he became a professional, all in this episode.
No, Justin, I'm really excited to have Jimmy Farris come be a part of Power Supply. I've been asking him for quite a while. He's a busy man. Exactly like he said, he's done a lot of leadership, and he doesn't do anything at 75%, 85%. This guy is at 99%. Go get it done every day. Move forward. I'm excited to hear his excitement, his unbelievable examples that I've heard down the road. But yeah, I've known him for a long time, and he just gets things done. So I think it's a really good, like you said, bonus episode for our listeners to hear on leadership and just achieving those goals and moving forward. So we're really blessed to have him on the show.
All right, up next, stay with us, Jimmy Farris.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Jimmy Farris, founder at Be a Pro. And Jimmy, we're going to be talking all about leadership today, elements of leadership. We've had some podcasts in the past, and a lot of them have been with folks that have been in healthcare supply chain in many, many years. But I can tell you that lessons learned from outside of the industry, other people's experiences, I think there's just a great deal of value, because sometimes we can all operate in our silos on a day-to-day basis. And so talking about your background and what you're doing to develop leaders in any industry, honestly, with Be a Pro, I think it's going to be a great discussion today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Man, I appreciate you guys for having me so much. Thank you.
So Jimmy, why don't you talk about Be a Pro and, you know, what kind of led you throughout your career to starting the company and what you kind of do?
Yeah. So Be a Pro is a phrase that one of my first NFL coaches, a guy named George Stewart, who was the receivers coach with the 49ers way back when I was a rookie, many, many, many years ago. To make a long story short, they signed me as an undrafted free agent. So I showed up for that first mini camp. And on that first day of the mini camp, essentially my first audition to be a member of the 49ers, I really flopped in a punt return drill, which was really important to me because in order to make the team, I was going to have to be a punt returner. And I put on a really poor performance. I just wasn't prepared. The wind was blowing out in the Bay Area like it often does, and kind of fell flat on my face. And after the drill, it was the last thing we were doing that day in practice. And I was walking back into the locker room, and Coach Stewart kind of came over to me and put his arm on my shoulder. And he said, "Well, how you feeling?" And I said, "Man, I feel like I just blew it." And he went on to say a lot of things I won't repeat here, but essentially what he said is, "Look, man, you were great in college. You were a great college player, but you got to understand that you're in the pros now. You're not an amateur anymore." And he said, "Up here, guys get paid a lot of money to do this. And if you want to stay here, you're going to have to learn how to be a pro and take everything to the next level." That was the first time I'd really ever heard that phrase. I knew immediately what he meant, that I needed to change the way I was thinking. I needed to change the things I was doing. And I went back into the locker room and really contemplated that. And I had the good fortune of working with Coach Stewart for that first season in San Francisco. And then I moved on to the Falcons. And a year later, he got the wide receiver job with the Falcons. So I got to spend 2 more years with him. And that phrase, "be a pro," was kind of something that was a constant with him. And I took that from those days with the 49ers and the Falcons and just made it kind of a phrase that I live by, "be a pro." And I made pro into an acronym that stands for prepared, reliable, and obsessed. And that's really the basis of the platform that I use now to train people in multiple industries all across the board on how they can be better, how they can become a better version or the best version of themselves, and how that applies to their performance as leaders or salespeople or managers or what have you.
That's fantastic. Jimmy, I have one quick question. Obviously, you had a lot of success in college. You were obviously a very, very good player there. You get a free agent, you get to the pros. But I have to know, were you starstruck at some point, that first couple practices or years? Were you just walking around going, "I cannot believe I'm
100%.
What kind of give us a story? Maybe you got something about that?
Yeah. So that started that first day, that first mini camp in San Francisco. I grew up a 49er fan because my dad grew up in the Bay Area. He was from Oakland, Alameda area. So we watched 49ers games together as a kid. And so when I got into that locker room for the first time, I remember asking one of the equipment guys, I said, "Hey, where was Deion Sanders' locker? Where was Steve Young's locker?" Jerry Rice still had his locker there. They had designated him a June 1st cut. And so he wasn't officially cut. So he still had a locker with his name tag up above it. And so I was going through that. And then as I was getting ready for that first practice, in walks this guy named Terrell Owens, who at the time, back in 2001, was arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL, right? It was either him or Randy Moss was pretty much everybody's, pretty much the comparison. And so he walks in, and I talk about this in detail in my book. He walks in and I'm watching him. Kind of sounds funny, but I'm watching him get undressed and get changed into his practice gear. And I'm looking at this guy's body, and I'm just thinking,
different.
If this is what NFL receivers look like, I might as well go turn in my equipment and go upstairs and tell them, to get me a ticket back to Idaho. But that continued from Terrell Owens to, then I got to Atlanta and played with Mike Vick. I played with Mark Brunell and Santana Moss, and obviously Tom Brady, who was a young Tom Brady, kind of not yet the guy that we know him now to be, when I was in New England. And I can remember, some of the last games I played in, playing against the Packers and watching Brett Favre run onto the field and thinking, can't believe I'm on the same field as Brett Favre. So I don't think I ever lost that. Every stadium that I played in, I took a look around in pregame warmups at some point and just thought, as a kid growing up, I saw so many games being played here in Giant Stadium or Lambeau or the Vet in Philadelphia or even the RCA Dome in Indianapolis and some of these stadiums, and thinking, I can't believe I'm here. So I never lost that.
Well, Jimmy, I love the whole starstruck kind of monologue you just shared with us. And we always venture into healthcare a little bit too. And it's like, as you start and like, say you get that job, it's like you got your job. We're always learning best practices of like, you're trying to move up and it sounds like you had some mentors. You had some people you looked at, like, I got to be like this guy, or some coaches. And then you got to that level eventually. You got to that level. You just kept working and kept working and kept working. What are some key things that you like grabbed a hold of and move forward from that to get to that leadership level? I mean, you didn't walk in being a leader. You had to earn it to get there. So maybe share some of those best practices for our listeners too.
Yeah. So there's 2 that come to mind. The first one is kind of funny. They're very similar in many ways, but the first one is this idea of R&D. And I heard a guy talk about this one time in a keynote. Most people think of R&D as research and development. He defined it as rip off and duplicate. And I think that's an important role or an important concept that anybody, especially when you're new in an organization or an industry, or when you're a rookie like me, is to look at what the most successful people are doing and take the things from them that resonate with you that you can implement into your own game. So much of things in leadership, or particularly personal development, but also high performance in sports or business, so much of this stuff is things that other people are already doing. As they say, nothing's new under the sun, right? And so sometimes we try to get real cute and think about new ways of doing things, and nothing's new. It's old ways of doing things, doing the things that work and that have worked. And when you've got people that are in close proximity with you that are using those techniques, those tactics, those practices, and having success with them, more success than you're having, those have always been things I've looked at and said, well, let me rip it off and duplicate it for myself. And that plays right into kind of the second piece for me, which is this idea of modeling. Similar concept, but a little more in depth, in that successful people have certain patterns that they run. They've got programs. If you think about like an operating system or an app on your phone, they're running a program. They're doing certain things that other people are not doing, and they're getting results based on the things that they're doing. And so I looked at Terrell Owens when I realized, like, hey, I got to be a lot better if I'm going to make this team in San Francisco. And if I've got any chance to have a career in the NFL, I've got to be a lot better now. Like, I don't have months to go back in the lab and practice and try to get better. I've got to be better now. And the quickest way that I figured I could do that was if I looked at Terrell Owens, looked at everything he was doing, and did that to the very best of my ability, that if it worked for him, it would have to work for me on some level. Even though I knew I'd never become Terrell Owens, I wouldn't be a Terrell Owens clone. I could do exactly what he was doing, the way he was doing it, to the best of my ability. And I figured if I did that, I had to get better results. And I did. That's, again, been kind of a foundational piece for me moving forward. Everything I've done in life, everything that I've ventured into or that I've tried to accomplish, I looked at somebody that was doing it at a higher level. I always like to say, find people who are doing what you're dreaming. I would find people that were doing it at the level I wanted to do it, and I would just try to model their behavior, model their actions, and model the things that they were doing that were leading to that success. And I still do it today.
So what's interesting about that is Terrell Owens wasn't necessarily your official mentor. He didn't come over and put his arm around you and say, hey, I'm going to show you how to do this, kid, right? Instead, he was a mentor just by example. But I think it also highlights what it means to be somebody who is capable of being mentored. And it starts with allowing people to mentor you without them even knowing it, right?
Hayes struggles with that. Hayes always struggles with
Hayes
that.
won't listen. Hayes won't listen to me. But Jimmy, anyway, that's an inside joke on the show that will leak out over time. But I think that's an important lesson, right? And sometimes people think, why am I the only one who's working hard in my department? Why am I the one that puts in the extra hours? Why am I the one that does this or that? Maybe nobody else is doing it. But truthfully, what you just described, especially in a winning culture, is that the more people that are doing that, the more others start. Eventually somebody comes into that department that says, I'm going to emulate that. And maybe they don't have the same level of ability, but setting that tone is really important. I want to get to something else that you said too, when Coach worked with you and you kind of realized that you had to change the way you were thinking. What were some of the things that were going on in your mind that were holding you back? What were some of those negative or at least non-productive thoughts that were happening?
It really centered around the fact that I came in there with a mentality that I was good enough and I was going to prove them wrong. I was going to prove all the doubters wrong, all the teams that didn't draft me, including the 49ers. I was going to prove to them that they made a mistake by not drafting me. And I was thinking back on all of the things I'd done from the time I was a 10-year-old kid who wrote down the goal, that when I was a grown adult or whatever the time frame was, 10 or 15 years, that my goal was to make it to the NFL. I was thinking back on all the time from that 10-year-old to the 23-year-old that was now a 49er and thinking, I've worked so hard. I deserve this. I'm good enough, right? I've done everything and I'm going to prove to them how good I am. And that's an easy thing for most of us to fall into, right? We put in the work and we want to prove people wrong.
It's a little bit of the martyr syndrome too, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I sacrificed
100%.
everything, so I should get this.
Yep. And so what Coach Stu made me realize in that moment was that the mindset that I'm here to prove you guys wrong was incorrect, and that the mindset needed to be, I got to get a lot better, right? And that's hard for some of us to admit sometimes, because it's almost admitting like, hey, I'm not good enough. How many of us struggle with those feelings of, am I good enough? And I didn't want to deal with that. I wanted to tell myself that I was good enough, that I did belong there. The reality is that I wasn't, and I needed to get better. And the mindset of a pro is to humble yourself. Somebody with a pro mindset says something like, there's nothing I can't get better at, right? Amateurs say things like, I got this. I'm good enough. Hey, I've been doing this for X number of years. Like, I got it. Pro says there's nothing I can't get better at. Pros are people who will look in the mirror and say, I know I have weaknesses. I'm going to seek out coaching and feedback and people that can help me get better. It's those subtle shifts in the mindset that, although Stu didn't say that stuff to me directly, that's what he was implying. Hey, you were great as an amateur, but you're a pro now. So it's a whole different ball game. So humble yourself, submit to the coaching, understand that you got a lot of work to do. You got to get a lot better. And that was the shift. And it happened literally like that. And from that day forward, I tried to become a sponge. And that story I just told about how I modeled Terrell Owens would be evidence of that.
Jimmy, talk to me a little bit about the day-to-day grind. How do you persevere? How do you keep moving forward? Whether it's an NFL, being a pro, or if it's someone that's leadership in a healthcare arena, how do you grind every day, and how do you persevere to keep moving that direction? How do you not become complacent and I'm done, I'm tired? What does that look like? And maybe share some examples maybe you ran into in your career.
Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the things that used to get me down at times, let's say in March of an off season, and I'd be thinking to myself, like, I got to do this all over again, man. I got to all these months of training, and then we got training camp, and then, I got to try to survive the round of cuts to make the team again. And I'd project out so far into the future, right? 6-8 months into the future. And while I think it's good, it's important, it's imperative that we all have kind of that big picture, long view of where we ultimately want to be. The way that you avoid the burnout, the way that you avoid being overwhelmed by all of the things that you got to do is something really simple. And this is not going to blow anybody's mind. It's not going to reinvent the wheel, but it's that idea of you focus on, what does it take for me to be great today? And the guy who taught me that was Bill Belichick. And of course, that was something that I'd known and I'd heard, but he used a phrase that really crystallized it for me. And the phrase is string them together. And what happened is I was in the process in the spring with the Patriots, obviously trying to make that team, very talented team. And Belichick came up to me one day after we'd done like a 7-on-7 drill and I'd had a really good period, caught a couple balls and done some things. And we were going to the next period and he kind of caught up to me and he said, hey, you had a great practice yesterday. You're having a great practice today. All you got to do is come out tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and keep having great practices and just string them together. That's how you're going to make this team. That's how you're going to be great. That's how you're going to achieve all the things you want to achieve, essentially. And so that concept of string them together, like, I don't have to be great in September. I don't have to be great a year from now. I got to be great today and do that today. And then tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to say, what do I got to do to be great today? And I'm going to do that. You do that for 7 days. What do you got? You got a great week, right? You put 4 great weeks together. What's that make? It makes a great month. 12 great months makes a great year, and so on and so on and so on. And so I always try to coach people on that idea of, no, you don't have to. Somebody comes to me and says, man, I want to lose 50 pounds, man. That's a heavy lift. That's a tall order. So you don't have to lose 50 pounds. Just lose 1 pound and then lose another pound and then lose another pound. And sooner or later, each one of those pounds adds up to 50 and you'll be there. So don't let the big picture overwhelm you. It's like coaches come in and say, what's the goal for the season? Hey, go 16-0 and win a Super Bowl. It's like, no, the goal is to win 1 game. You got to go 1-0. And then you got to go 2-0 and then 3-0, one at a time, string them together, have great days. And that's how I've always overcome that idea of burnout or overwhelm, or those days when I'm like, man, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm like, okay, you don't have to do it, Jim. Don't do anything. Just be great today and then forget tomorrow.
But what happens when you're not great that one day, right? Like, let's say you just strung together 20 great days and you're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I stunk today. How do you take that pressure off? Because one of the things is I'm hearing consistency, right? That's what string them together is. And Belichick's obviously all about that consistency. I want to know what I'm going to get from you when you get on the field, right? So I can count on you. And that's trust. And that happens for salespeople in healthcare. It happens like the C-level. If you're going to get a promotion, you're stringing together reasons for the people that are going to move you up in an organization. It's all about trust. I mean, it's built on delivering results, but ultimately it's a trust building process, and you're building trust with yourself as well. Like, that's how you get confidence, right? You trust in yourself, and that becomes shown as confidence. So what happens when you throw up the stinker?
So here's another little phrase that you can write down. Again, nothing that's going to blow anybody's mind. It's a cute little phrase, but it means so much when you apply it. The phrase is next play. Here's what I mean by that. I remember all the way back to being a kid in 6th grade. I was playing flag football, and my dad was one of the coaches on my flag football team. And I played quarterback, and I called my own plays, essentially, right? I would call the plays to run or pass or whatever. There was a lot of times throughout the course of a game, obviously, where I would make a mistake, throw a pick or run a bad play or do something. After every play, I'd look over at my dad, like a lot of kids do. You kind of look over at your dad for reassurance, or I would look over after a bad play. I would look at my dad, and he would, I know probably the listeners can't see it, but he would be standing on the sidelines going like this, kind of twirling his finger, and he'd be kind of lipping to me, next play, next play. In other words, forget what just happened. The only thing that matters is the next play that you run. And so at 12, I learned that concept of, hey, you had a bad play, or in this case, you had a bad day, move on tomorrow. Next play. Tomorrow is not affected by anything that happened today. You got a chance tomorrow to start over. If you miss today, no problem. Don't miss twice. Move on to the next play. If you're too focused on what happened on the last bad play, then it does affect the next play. I heard Kobe Bryant say in an interview some years ago, a reporter said, what's the mindset when you're late in a game, maybe 3rd or 4th quarter, and you've been ice cold, you're 3 for 18 from the field and nothing's going right for you. What's the mindset to pull up and take a big shot, late in a game when you've been having that kind of game? And Kobe kind of laughed and he goes, the next one's going in. The guy goes, what do you mean? And he goes, the next shot I take is going in. The guy said, what happens if you miss that one? He said, well, then I'll shoot again and that one is going to go in. So it's that idea of the next play or the next shots going in. This is something I teach to salespeople all the time. You know, you get 10 no's in a row on the phone. You're dialing for dollars. You get 10 no's in a row. What's the mindset to make the next call? The next call, I'll get the sale. The next door I knock on will be the one. The next person I talk to is going to say yes. And you just keep believing that until that happens. You had a bad day today. Tomorrow's going to be great. If tomorrow's another bad day, hey, you know what? Wednesday will be great. What other choice do you have than to think like that?
You know, Jimmy, as I sit here and think about this and listen to you, which I love it, by the way, great job. I think, you know, organized sports teaches a million things, at youth to college to pro. But one thing that I sit here and listen to as a pro, particularly if you're not, you know, the elite of the elite, you always have to have that mindset that someone's chasing me. They're trying to replace you every week, every month, every year in the draft and so how does that carry over into a professional life once the game's gone? And, you know, when you're working with your clients and you're working with people, to me, that, you know, that competitive nature that you have is so vital. It's that, you know, I'm not going to be outdone. It's the next day, but also, you know, that I can be replaced. And so can you give us anything on that? Because I think that, to me, that mentality is very, very powerful.
Yeah. So this is something I actually get a little bit of pushback on, but it's an evolution that I went through myself, and I've a number of the super high performers that I've had the good fortune to be around. And then some of those other guys like the Kobe's and the Jordans and Brady's, I've heard them talk about this in a similar way. And it's this idea of moving from a mindset of competition to a mindset of creation. And what I mean by that is this: we spend a lot of time, particularly when I was young, I spent a lot of time competing with people, trying to prove people wrong, trying to beat people out, trying to be better. A lot of people in business try to have a better product, or they're competing with the next company or the next business. And hey, we're number one in sales for this quarter or for this year or whatever. And they get caught up in this competition. What the greatest in the world have said is that at some point, trying to be better than somebody else, or trying to beat somebody else out, or trying to quote unquote win, no longer drives me. And what the true driver becomes is trying to determine how great I can be. At the end of the day, it comes down to pushing myself to a point to see how great can I be. And it goes back to that idea, that age-old idea that the only competition is the man in the mirror, right? And so at some point, to answer your question, the goal is to move out of a mindset of competition and trying to beat people and trying to be better and trying to win. And you move to a mindset that says, you know what? I want to just be the best that I can be, whatever that is. Whatever my ceiling is, I want to be bumping my head up against that thing. And sooner or later, those ceilings become floors, and you just keep getting better, and you keep elevating, and you keep creating a better version of you. And to me, that's where true fulfillment comes from. Because if it's always just about competing and beating somebody out or winning, then it never stops, right? There's always somebody that's better. There's always somebody that's got more money. There's always somebody that's better looking. There's always somebody whose business is doing better, right? And we'll kill ourselves trying to beat everybody. But if the goal becomes, I just want to create the best business I can create, I want to be the best leader that I can be. Think
about how much frustration you shed in that process, Jimmy, right? Because the frustration that comes from that can really hold you back. I remember my son was in junior high and he loved sports, but, you know, like me, not a gifted athlete, but loved to participate, loved baseball, loved football, couldn't make a lot of the teams. And then all of a sudden he got involved with cross country, and this concept of the personal best got introduced to him. And it was an absolute game changer. And he still wasn't setting records on cross country, but at the banquet his senior year, the coach talked about what an amazing teammate he was because he was always encouraging others. He was always improving and he made others around him better. And so,
Yes.
but before that, he had that I'm comparing myself to everybody else. I'm nowhere near where the kids are that, are really athletes. And it was killing him. And then all of a sudden, he flourished as a human being with that personal best concept. Can you talk about that, of that team player dynamic, maybe leap off of that?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the direction you were looking for, but one of the things that I talk about in all of my seminars and any training programs I do is I've got a kind of a list of these old cliches, so to speak, that I like to be a bit of a contrarian with. The one that comes to mind now is that idea that there's no I in team. And I call BS on that. I think that the individuals are the most important part of the team, and that the focus for every individual on every team should be on themselves and how they can, again, back to what I was just saying, how they can create the best version of themselves as a player, as a leader, as a manager, as a boss, you name it, whatever your role on the team that you're on is, your sole focus should be, how can I be the very best at this, at what I'm doing, at what my role is on this team? How can I be the very best version of me? How can I create the best version of me, knowing that that's the greatest sacrifice you can make and the greatest contribution you can make to any team that you're on. If you have a team of 10 people and every one of them is focused on being the best that they can be so that they can make the greatest contribution to the team, what effect does that have on the team? It's a rising tide. It's kind of that rising tide lifts all boats, right? If everybody's focused on being the best they can be,
instead of better than everybody else,
or instead of thinking, well, I'm not the main guy. I'm just a small player. I don't really have a big role. So I'm going to defer to these people, whatever. We talk about all the time, like, again, another cliche, chain's only as strong as its weakest link, right? That means that regardless of what role you have on a team, it's important that you're strong, because at some point, if you get called on, if you got to step up, or if the job that you do is vital and you're not up to that challenge, then the whole chain breaks. So the idea of from guy number 1 to guy number 53 on an NFL roster, each one of those people being focused on being the very best that they can be, focusing on the I in team, me, being the best that I can be, that's the greatest contribution you can make to any team. And that's how you build strong, effective, powerful teams.
Justin, I think, and Hayes, just that conversation right there, we talk about culture change in healthcare, and it has hit us like a lead balloon right now in the last 2 years with everything that we've gone through with the pandemic and inflation. And that whole link conversation right there of change is where we need to go. We have to have that. And Jimmy, just go ahead, Hayes.
I'm ready. Let's go. Let's keep this going.
I'm ready. We keep talking. But I just think you really hit the nail on the head right there with that conversation. And I think that is something we talk about. Everybody talks about change, culture change. We have to change. And people are like, reduce the variability, change the words. And you talk about the whole group dichotomy in a healthcare system when you have all these different players from the C-suite down to the inventory specialist that's in the receiving dock bringing in sets for a patient admission. They've all got to be linked together. And I think that was just a really good point, and I didn't want to miss it on how it correlates with what we do every day. So,
well, and you guys probably, again, Gary, like you just kind of laid out through the last couple of years, as challenging as things have been, there's a lot of people that in challenging situations, when they're a part of an organization or a team, will kind of take on that mindset. hey, there's nothing I can do. What can I do? I'm just a little guy. I'm just a this or that. I'm not making the decisions. What am I supposed to do? And the answer to that is be the best you can be. If that's all you can do, be the very best you can be. Look, I played on a lot of teams where I didn't have a big role as a wide receiver. So I'm sitting there on the sideline of a game and we're down 21-0. And I'm like, well, I'm not getting any balls thrown to me. I'm not playing on offense. What can I do? I'll go out and make a tackle on special teams. I'll go out and make a block on kickoff return. I'll go out and try to make a tackle on punt return. That's the role that I can play. So damn it, I'm going to do that to the very best of my ability.
Jimmy, I can't believe we're out of time, but we're definitely fired up. We're ready to take the field with you.
Dude,
yeah,
I love it.
Great job. I mean, it's just I would love to pick your brain for another 30 minutes just on your career. And like one question I had saved up that we don't have time for, was for you to tell me like, what was the lowest low? And then how did you dig your way out of it? Because I feel like that insurmountable obstacle is something that, to Gary's point, change is so needed because we just went through some really insurmountable obstacles. At least it sure seemed that way to everybody, not just supply chain, but people working on the front lines in all kinds of capacities in healthcare. It just seemed like, are we ever going to get out of this? Are we ever going to find our way? So, maybe that'll be the topic or the focus of another interview with you at some point. But
yeah, I was going to say, let's save it. And when we get on next time, we'll dive into that.
I'm all in for that.
That would be great. Jimmy, awesome job. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you having me.
That was Jimmy Farris, founder at Be a Pro. And what a bunch of interesting stories, Hayes. I know this wasn't necessarily a conversation directly about supply chain, but it's why we gave it the bonus episode in between seasons release, because what an enormous amount of energy this guy has. And it's funny how he shared his insights, but a lot of them are just back to the basics, the fundamentals, and what he learned early on about how to improve when all of a sudden he realized, I might have been the number one receiver coming into the NFL, but now all of a sudden Terrell Owens is across from me in the locker room, and I got to figure out how I'm going to be better enough to stay on the field. And watching somebody who has been successful and doing the things that are obviously working for them, it might not take you to the same level, but mentorship without actually having somebody take you under their wing and just watching what they do, what a great story Jimmy has.
Oh, Jimmy was wonderful. And of course, me being a football fan, I really enjoyed it. But, clearly a guy who, to your point, had a lot of success at college. He goes to college or to pro and he's just at the bottom of the rung. But as he said, I got to be a pro. I got to show up, got to string days together. He did all those wonderful things that every one of us can do and use in our life. And it could be in, healthcare. It could be in anything, but just show up, do the right thing, work hard, and great things happen. But he was a great, great model for that and really a good guy.
Yeah, I love that string them together from Belichick. Great piece of advice. And, just get back on the horse. If you've got a bad day, just keep going.
That's the only way to it, baby. You just got to keep on showing up.
That's right. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for this show because we keep showing up every single week for you doing this. And as Hayes loves to say,
we're money, baby.
We're money. It's a gentleman's agreement that you're going to like and share. We don't charge you anything. We're just having fun on here and doing it to share information and highlight successes and people's experiences. So give us a like if you like what you're hearing. Certainly you can send us any kind of feedback you want by email to info@powersupplymedia.net. But we'd love comments on the LinkedIn post. Follow Power Supply there. You can also find us on Facebook. And if you're already listening to podcasts, that's great. You'll definitely find us on Apple, Amazon, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever that favorite app is. But the best way to listen is to download the smartphone app for iPhone and Android. You just go on over to the app marketplace or the Play Store and just search for the Power Supply Media app and then download it. Give us a rating and a review while you're there downloading the app. We'd love to see that. And you'll get all the content, not only these podcasts, but our articles on the go that we put out there as well. And on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thank you so much for listening to this episode of
Power Supply.